Hi you guys. So a couple of years ago, actually this was actually way back in 2016, that I had three visions, and they were 3 days apart, and this was a repulse. So in the first vision, I was in New York City. There was these skyscraper buildings. There was like this skyway box that connects one building to the next, and it's like one of those clear skyways where you walk through this glass tunnel from one building across to the next building, but you're crossing over like an open road, like there's a road that is beneath or between these two buildings. And they have these kind of skyways in Minnesota, in places where it's really, really cold, and people don't want to have to go outside to go from one building to the next building. And so and the bottom of one of these office buildings was a barista or a cafe / diner, and people were having coffee and tea, and they were eating like little cakes and little quiches and things like that. But you could also get a full meal if you wanted to. I could see where in the back there was like this open grill, and you could see the flames in the grill, and you could see the waiters walking around with their white uniforms on. And I could tell that these were people who worked in this building, and that it was their day off, but they were still used to dressing up, so they were dressed up to work in this building. And the only reason I knew it was a day off, because you just have a knowing about things in dreams. And so the dream showed me how they were well dressed, and their hair was well kept and very well manicured. Everyone looked very sharp and very professional. And then the dream shifted, and then I could see outside where people were walking along the sidewalks, and just very casually, very leisurely. No one was in a rush, because I could tell that this must be like a holiday. Then it showed the highways, and it showed the cars on the highways and byways. And then out of nowhere, the dream shifted again, and I could see this huge tsunami wave coming in and crashing over the highways and byways. It flooded the cars off the road and completely wiped where the highways and byways were full of cars. It was complete. All these cars were wiped away in an instant. The people who were walking along the buildings were swept up and swept down the sidewalk. In between these two buildings, underneath the skyway, all of those cars were flooded away by this huge tsunami that came in. The people that were in the restaurant were swirling around under these heavy waves of currency that came in from the water, and I could see that they were all dead. The dream ended with me seeing the water continuously rising amidst these high skyscraper buildings and thrashing back and forth against these high skyscraper buildings. It was as if the water was alive. I really got the sense that this was judgment. I got the sense that this water had a consciousness where it knew that it was destroying these people, and that its assignment was to judge these people in New York City. And it wasn't just New York City. This tsunami wave, it carried on well into the mainland of the United States. By the end of the dream, this water was all the way to the top of these high skyscraper buildings and continuing to rise as I woke up. And there was this very scary and eerie feeling about it. Then 3 days later, I had the next dream. Again, this was in New York City. And now we're at a park, and it looks like they're celebrating the 4th of July. And I could see the back of this lady's shirt. She had on a white shirt. She was standing next to her daughter, who looked about 5 years old. And Then the dream shifted, and I can see the front of the shirt, and I can see where there was this blue stripe that came to a peak, and this red stripe that came to a peak, and there was a space in between. And it gave the sense of like red, white, and blue, and like a fireworks that went off, because it was all these little red and blue dots that looked like fireworks at the peak of the shirt. So then it panned down to the daughter, and the daughter had this aluminum little flower windmill that was twirling around in her hands. And then it panned out, and I could see all these people with red, white, and blue paraphernalia, the 4th of July clothing that you typically see during the 4th of July. People had their lawn chairs out, and they had their coolers beside them with their food in it. And they were all, celebrating the day and waiting for the evening to come to celebrate the fireworks. Then I could see, like in the outskirts of town, some poor people walking along this tall fence, barbed wire fence, and they were near this industrial area where there were like plants, plants that produce like chemicals and things like that. And then I could see the highways and byways again, full of cars. And then the dream panned back to the park. And then I could see in the sky over the park this huge white mushroom cloud. And it had these electric streaks in it, and there was these royal blue streaks also within this mushroom cloud. Within a split second after seeing this cloud, the whole scene went white, and then it went black. And then it came back to where I could see where everything was burnt to a crisp. The cars on the side of the road were burnt to such a crisp that they were seared gray, and there was these large circles on the side of the doors of the cars where the heat really got hot. And you could see where it went from gray to white, where it got to the hottest intensity of heat. All the windows were melted out, and the interior of the vehicles were all burnt to a crisp. Then the dream shifted to the highways and byways, and the highways were cracked in half. There were these huge metal bars that were like twisted together, broken off, and a huge part of the highway had collapsed all the way down to the ground, and the rest of the highway was still there, and there were cars trapped on it. And then I could see people struggling to stay alive and to not slide down this steep decline of this highway because of how it had broken. It had the way that it had broken, it was the end of the highway that had this metal sticking out of it was sticking up in the air, and there was this steep decline, and so these cars were like stuck in the ridges of the side of the highway. But if they had tried to stand or walk, they had the danger of rolling down this steep highway to their death. There was a sense that there was no one to come to rescue them, because this was out of the blue. There was no warnings of these attacks. This was like this was an attack of some type of missile that came into America and basically incinerated America. And there was this lady hanging off of the highway. I could feel her fear, because she knew that she couldn't hold on much longer. And then the dream shifted. Now we're in a further part of New York City that was not yet damaged. The part that was damaged was closer to the ocean, to the Atlantic Ocean, but we were further inland when the dream shifted. And there was this office building that had no light because it was still affected by what happened. the electricity was cut and they were running off a generator. Everybody else in the building was left except for one man who was like running for an office, and he was on his phone yelling and complaining because of all the money he was losing, and he was up for some type of an election. Then beyond him in this dark office building, I could see a Christ-like figure, and he pointed to his left, which was my right, because I was facing him, and I was in spirit form. So I floated off to the right, and when I floated off to the right, the dream shifted, and I was in this holy like place. Everything looked crystal clear, and there was this crystal mall just made of like pure crystal, and there were no clothing departments or any merchandise departments. It was just people walking around who had just recently passed away and who are now in this heavenly type place. And somebody was looking for directions, and I was trying to they came to me for directions, and I was trying to like figure out where to guide them to. And as I was speaking, I was looking around, and I could see where there was a doorway that led to the entrance of this mall, and it was full of light. And as the people started to worry and be concerned about how they got here and where they were, I can feel this presence of comfort come over them, like the Holy Spirit comfort had came over them. But I was so shooken up. I was still in trauma of what was taking place in America. That my body, my soul was still shaken up from what was going on, and I didn't know how to really calm down. But the Holy Comforter had brought peace to them, and they were in perfect peace. Then that dream ended there, and then 3 days later I had the third vision. And in this vision, we were back in New York City, and it looked like it was months after the attack. All of these skyscraper buildings were laid flat. There was no working electricity. It was like everyone was back to this rudimentary way of surviving. The pain was impenetrable. Like, the pain saturated the atmosphere. There were no words to be spoken because of so much life that had been lost. There were very few people walking around, and the cars that were there were not usable. And the few cars that were, they had to use the honor system, where one would go and then the other would let the other go from the other side of the street, or the cross section of the street. Then I looked over and I saw in the road, right next to the curb of the, it was like he was in the road, but he was next to the curb of the sidewalk, and he was selling these little flower pods, and it was like a dozen of them, but they kept regenerating every time he would give one away. And so some of the flower pods were like just a little green stem coming up. Others were just starting to bud, and others were in full bloom, and they were all these multiple colors, these beautiful colors. And so this white lady came up to him, and she started to dig in her purse for some money, and she said, "How much for one?" And like, I need to back up, because she was very stunned that she was even seeing any flowers, because of the nuclear attacks. There was no greenery around, and the air just started clearing up, but there was nothing growing around. And so she was shocked to see any flowers, and she said, "How much for one?" And he said, "You can pay with nothing. You can pay with nothing." And he gave her one of the full bloom flower pods with all these colorful flowers, and you could sense this warm healing going into her body. And she walked away very delighted to have received one. Then I was behind her and I walked up, and I wanted one too, but I didn't feel like I deserved one because I didn't actually live in New York at the time. But he could read my heart, and so he reached into the box of flower pods and he picked out one for me, and this one was a little green stem that hadn't yet sprouted yet. And he handed it to me, and again I could feel this light going into my body and this warmth and healing. And as I walked away, that's when the dream ended. And so it was like this guy that was selling these flower pots, he was like a Christ-like figure. He represented Christ, and he represented healing after everything that had taken place in New York, after all of these attacks had taken place. And so this is a repost of these dreams that I had, and I really do feel like we should be looking out because of what's happening in the world today, of these things coming to pass. I would suggest to stay prayed up, to stay in prayer, but to not worry, because it looks like as though God is going to take care of his own people, because I saw so many people in this heavenly place. Everything was made of this crystal. It was like a crystal city with these crystal malls, and everyone was in perfect peace who went to this place. And so we should look out for these things coming to pass, but not to worry, because we know that this is the last days, and this is the fulfillment of scripture and God's prophecy. We all can see what's coming down the pipeline with Russia and China, and so don't need to beat on a horse. It's not if, it's just when it happens. So I just wanted to repost this, and you all be well.